That ball is stroked. Gone! Oh my goodness, on a frozen rope. Throw in there on one hop. Out! Oh, he hosed him. Hop steps, great dump off and a two-hand jam. And welcome back, wonderful people, for episode 24 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. I hope everybody breathed a sigh of relief for football being back. That's exactly what we had on the slate last week, and it was primarily about wrapping up the quarterback battles from NFL training camps and pondering the last couple of big-name contract disputes. Some guys are still holding out. One huge extension just finally got signed. That was CeeDee Lamb with the Cowboys. And rosters were trimmed from 90 to 53 on Tuesday. I don't say that last part as if it's a big positive in and of itself, but it's one more sign that the regular season is upon us. One more fun thing coming at the end of today's episode, I'm going to give a little bit of fantasy football advice for the first time ever. Buckle up. Now, I don't think I was wrong about any of the quarterback battles per se, especially that the Patriots would be the closest race of all. Just to troll the entire league and the media, head coach Gerard Mayo had picked a starter a couple of days ago, and then he waited until this Thursday morning, August 29th, to announce it. They were between an 8-year vet in Jacoby Brissett and a now 22-year-old rookie, Drake May. Fun fact, his 22nd birthday is actually today as this episode comes out, August 30th. You had a known NFL commodity and a complete wild card. For a franchise in shambles, they do have plenty to be excited about now as they officially announced Jacoby Brissett as their starting quarterback, at least for the opener. The factors that I think finally made this decision for them, Brissett has 48 career starts, some of them coming in a pretty similar offensive system to what New England is going to run this year under Alex Van Pelt, their new offensive coordinator. It's a West Coast style system that it'll let Brissett get the ball out quickly with short and intermediate throws. They'll run some no huddle and some tempo, and they'll script a lot of drives to save some thinking. Of course, Drake May has the bigger arm. He is probably a little bit faster and more agile, but he just isn't the best fit for that kind of scheme. When May does get a chance, he's going to be a fun guy to watch. He's going to be an improviser and a gunslinger, and he can probably throw it a mile, but don't expect any of that this year. The Pittsburgh Steelers also had a relatively tight quarterback race, but I think they made the right call, and you'll probably agree. Russell Wilson's going to start, and Justin Fields is the backup. It was, from everything I can tell, a lot closer than it should have been, but Mike Tomlin said that the deciding factor was experience and pedigree. Honestly, I love coaches that are so open about that, so transparent. Props to Mike Tomlin on that, and he's been really good at that throughout his career. Ironic a bit to focus on the pedigree, considering Russ was a third-round pick out of NC State and Wisconsin, and then Justin Fields was a first-rounder who played at Georgia and Ohio State. Still, though, I know what he means. It's an utterly what-have-you-done-for-me-lately league, and Russell Wilson has been the better NFL player and done it for longer. I said what I said about Russ last week. I truly believe Russ is going to find his way into the Hall of Fame, if for no other reason than racking up all those stats over the years, and he's been to 2 Super Bowls and won one. Of course, you've already heard the arguments I've made statistically if you listen to the NFL Hall of Fame tier list I did with Isaiah Fleming. Kind of hard to believe it, but that was back in the second week of May for episode 8. Now, I digress again. What you really need to know, Russell Wilson is as consistent as any quarterback, arguably ever. He's never been the undisputed best. He's never gotten an MVP vote for reasons known only to the Almighty. That still baffles me. Such is life, but he's the most accomplished quarterback not named Aaron Rodgers that's left in the league. And I think his clutch gene is the best part about his game. The Steelers have a great defense, and they're going to be in a lot of one-score games. I'm telling you, you should still feel good about having Russell Wilson in the huddle in those situations when it's tight. Now for a rule change. We don't get a ton of these that are worth mentioning, so this should be kind of new and fun. I felt like dropping it into the last episode, and I even scripted up a quick rant about it, but I can't hold it in anymore. Do you like the new dynamic kickoff rules the league brought out this year? They tested them out in the preseason, and I'm just not sold on the idea yet. I'll do my best to explain them with my current understanding, which is always limited. A couple of things that are going to stay the same. The spot of the ball. For normal kickoffs, it's the 35, and for kickoffs after a safety, that's the 20. One big change is that no one except the kicker and the returners can move until the ball is either fielded or hits the ground. That's got to be the most awkward part of the play, right? Everyone else on the kicking and receiving teams, they just stare each other down. They size each other up when they would normally be crashing into each other. I think this timing takes away a lot of the more creative blocking assignments that kind of used to be possible when everyone had more time to run. It gives me an idea, though. Maybe the new meta could be kind of short motion from the receiving team. You have a few of the guys on the same side of the ball trade places right after the ball is fielded. Of course, it doesn't change the kickoff team's jobs. It's still lane-based and all about just bringing the war and blowing guys up, no matter really who tries to block you. Of course, that's not everything worth mentioning. They have also split the field up into zones a little bit, so the setup zone is where everybody in the receiving team, unsurprisingly, has to set up. It's this 5-yard area between their 35 and 30-yard line. You have to have at least 9 guys in there. And like I say, this is where those guys cannot move until the kick has hit the ground or somebody fields it. Then there's the landing zone. That's between the receiving team's goal line and the 20-yard line. Any kick that lands in there must be returned. That's where the NFL is hoping, this should have a much, much higher percentage of returns. The incentive to the kicking team is to always put the ball in here and not in the end zone. If you do kick a touchback that is all the way through the end zone, or the ball is fielded in the end zone and downed like normal, that ball is going to go all the way out to the 30. Definitely some significant changes and some kind of complicated stuff. So if you saw it in action, I'll probably make a little bit of a poll or a Q&A for this episode saying something to the effect of what could they change about it, did you like it or not? A few other things. Onside kicks were completely butchered in conjunction with the rest of these rule changes. Teams now have to declare every time they're going to try an onside kick. Barf. They can only do them in the fourth quarter, and they have to be trailing in the game at the time. I hate everything about this if that wasn't clear enough. I think every part of it is a mistake. And consider a surprise onside kick. That's one of the most high-risk, high-reward plays in all of sports. I can't think of a single good argument for taking a play like that out of the game. Do you remember the Saints using one of those surprise onsides coming out of halftime to help beat Peyton Manning and the Colts in that Super Bowl after Hurricane Katrina? I'd argue that's one of my earliest memories. It's still one of the most audacious and amazing play calls I think the league's ever seen. And their coach at the time, Sean Payton, was lauded as a genius because it worked. I see this as one of the worst rule changes in a long time. I think the only recent thing I hate more is maybe the roughing the passer rules where you can't land on the quarterback with your full body weight. The enforcement of that has just gone way too far, and guys are literally afraid to touch the quarterback at all for fear of a penalty. Now for the why, for the explanation on the kickoff change. I haven't heard enough talk about this rather crucial part of the equation here. The league put out an explainer on their football operations page. They gave a bunch of info. They said that the kickoff return rates last season were the lowest in history. Unsurprising. Of course, that means that the touchback rates were also the highest. They said injury rates were, quote, unacceptable in the years before last year when the returns were a little bit more common. I don't know exactly what that threshold of acceptable versus unacceptable is. I suppose that's a semantic argument, though. My thoughts on it as a former player, though very much not a good one and not one that ever really spent much time on kickoff or kick return, every single play contains some degree of risk. And a lot of that, I think, can't be eliminated if you want to play the game at all. The idea that you can make the game safer through rule changes, it's limited. It doesn't always have legs in every spot within the game that you could think of. Still, these rules are going into effect whether we like them or not for this year. Could they roll them back, maybe make some changes? Who knows, a couple of years down the line. Now, finally, let me be your guide in embarrassing all your friends and taking their money. I'm talking, of course, about fantasy football. For the first time, I'm going to be the commissioner of a league. I have a 8-team league with my friends and my sister. It's my first time trying it as a commission, and I'm pretty excited. I'll give you my current lineup in that league and use it to give some thoughts on strategy. I randomized the draft order, and I happened to get the number 1 pick, which was pretty cool with that 1 out of 8 chance. Now, I'd be lying if I said I didn't fear the Madden curse at all, but I had no other choice than Christian McCaffrey with that first pick. For anybody that's not familiar, the Madden curse means you should probably be aware of who that cover athlete is on Madden because some weird and bizarre and unfortunate things tend to happen to them. Knock on wood. When it comes to McCaffrey, he had the second most receiving yards among running backs. He scored the most touchdowns in the league overall. He was the offensive player of the year and third in MVP. Definition of fantasy RB1. If I had to do it over again, I'd probably do it all the same. Now I'll rifle through the rest of my lineup. I have Jonathan Taylor from the Colts as my RB2, Garrett Wilson of the Jets, and Devontae Adams of the Raiders as my top 2 wide receivers. I got Joe Burrow in the 5th round, Evan Ingram, the Jags tight end, in the 6th, Joe Mixon, running back from Houston, the Cowboys defense, and Brandon Aubrey doubling down on Dallas for the special teams stuff. And then I got a lot of nice bench options that I'll get through as we get there. Now, 2 things that I recommend every beginner keep in mind. I think you desperately need to have 2 playable quarterbacks on your roster all the time this year. The injury rate of starting quarterbacks last year was unbelievable. I can't recall ever seeing anything like it. And with some guys, that means that there's a higher risk of re-injury this year. I was reasonably happy about getting Joe Burrow in the 5th round. And in fact, my backup was Aaron Rodgers. I was able to get him in the 13th. But I still have never been less confident about one position as we begin a fantasy season, just considering what we saw last year. Another thing I like to do in my drafts before most people is to lock up the kicker and the defense a little bit earlier. Make sure you get somebody that you can play every single week. Now, does a matchup-proof kicker or a defense exist? Well, obviously not, but I went all Cowboys on these spots like I said. I ended up using picks 64 and 65 on these. That's way higher than they would typically go, but only an 8-man league, and I already had most of my skill spots filled out. Brandon Aubrey was the 28-year-old rookie last year with one of the finest kicking seasons in the history of the league. He was the leading scorer in the league overall in fantasy as well as on the field. He went 10 of 10 from 50 yards or longer. That was an NFL record. 4 of 4 from 40 to 50 yards. And remember, you get extra fantasy points at those distances. Then there's the Cowboys defense and all the splash plays that they make. They scored 7 touchdowns on defense and special teams. They always rack up sacks, and they've been the most consistent fantasy unit over the last 5 years. If you can feel good about getting close to 20 points every week with just your kicker and defense, you'd be surprised about how much wiggle room you have for one of your running backs or receivers or even your quarterback to have a down game. Now, I'll give you some of the best value picks that I think I made. You never really know until the season starts, but these feel good right now. I got the Raiders' Devontae Adams at 32nd overall in the 4th. That was pretty cool. He had 175 targets last year, most in the league. Was he amazingly efficient? No, he finished as wide receiver 10, and yet he's still Devontae Adams. Future Hall of Famer, has the most touchdowns among actives. His route running isn't diminished. I think this is great value. I also got the Giants rookie receiver Malik Neighbors. He was still on the board in round 11 at pick 81. I thought that was awesome. The first couple weeks, he'll probably just be a depth piece on my bench, but if he ends up being one of the best or maybe the best rookie receiver this year, which we saw some hints of in the preseason, and he gets a big target share, it's a positively futile Giants offense, so I think that that's pretty likely. This could be my best value pick of all. I already mentioned Aaron Rodgers in the 13th round. I really hope I only have to play him on Joe Burrow's bye week, but he is still Aaron Rodgers, right? He didn't win 4 MVPs by accident. And if you go down that Jets roster, he honestly has a lot of help now. Do I think he has another MVP season in him? No, but I do think that he'll prove some people wrong again and end up somewhere in the top 10. I think that's totally realistic. The last pick that I'm really happy about is the Jaguars' Christian Kirk, all the way down at 112th overall in the 14th round. The Jaguars will probably be just as mid this year as they were last year, but they throw it really well and they run it poorly. That's kind of all that matters sometimes. That means that they're going to throw it enough, and Calvin Ridley came in there for the 1 year. He had his brief stint as the number 1 receiver, but now that spot should go right back to Christian Kirk. In 2022, he was one of the best overall fantasy options. He's sort of that slot maven that just gets a ton of volume, and I really, really cannot believe that he was there in the 14th round. I'll spitball out a couple more pretty simple tips to finish us out. For any first-round picks besides number 1 overall, obviously that should be Christian McCaffrey. I don't think that's too much of a stretch to say. I think it should be really receiver-heavy. There just aren't enough running backs that get lots of catches or that are on the field for, say, 80+% of the snaps. Receiving is just more valuable. It always will be. I think the only tight ends worth using any real draft capital on would be Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Mark Andrews. Those are the usual suspects, right? And if I'm being generous, Evan Ingram with the Jags. Of course, I'm a little bit biased because I picked him. If you can't get one of those top guys by, let's say, the 4th or 5th round, depending on how many teams are in your league, I think you're pretty much going to have to play the waiver wire every week and look for matchups, much as I hate to do that. A really, really smart guy to stash, by the way, if you're able to pick him late, is the Vikings' TJ Hawkinson. He's going to open up the season on the physically unable to perform or that PUP or PUP list, whatever you want to call it. But imagine as soon as he gets off, comes back, and especially if he's 100% healthy. If you can afford to wait that long, absolutely a great target. And that's all I have for episode 24 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Folks, we're almost half a year into this fun little side project, and honestly, I can't get enough of it. The practice in thinking about sports, writing, scripting, the variety of content, the choice to work on whatever I want. This is one of the coolest hobbies out there to me, and there's no reason to stop now. So what might we do next week? Still working on that college football episode, planning that out a little bit with Zach Metz of Upgood and Waldo. You've got the MLB heading down the stretch, and my Tigers are actually looking really dangerous right now, even in maybe the best division in baseball. As I speak, they've won 6 in a row, and I believe 9 out of their last 10. What that means, of course, is I'm really invested in that AL wildcard race. I'm almost ready to try and predict all the Gold Glove and Silver Slugger winners. I've talked about that for a while, and I've had a working list since the All-Star break. That's just a tough task, but man, could be fun as well. As I speak, I already did my first high school football game of the year, and I was able to cover my good old alma mater. I'm not kidding. Sports is poetry. The last 3 years, I've gotten to cover games with my old high school, being the opponent. I'm also doing more college football and soccer. Man, give me that sweet, sweet content. Like I say, I'm going to try and get a new intro put together soon, hoping to bless your ears with that by next week, but we'll see. And lastly, I know school is starting or has started. Kids, just do your homework. This has been episode 24 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me. And that ball is stroked. Gone! Oh my goodness, on a frozen rope. Throw in there on one hop. Out! What? Oh, he hosed him. Hop steps, great dump off and a two-hand jam.